This weekend in Montreal, there's been what's been described as pro-Palestinian riots, pro-Palestinian protests, anti-Israel protests, anti-Israel riots. Even some of the mainstream media were reporting it as anti-NATO protests. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about what's going on in Montreal. Not so much the politics of it, although that's a little bit related, I guess. I want to talk about the spirit that seems to be behind these protests. And if you haven't seen these images, I'll show you a few of them here. This is just from Twitter to give you a sample of some of what's been going on in Montreal. You've got protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call them, demonstrators, with flags, with, not sure what you call those, smoke bombs, smoke grenades, and they're breaking windows. Seem to be lighting certain things, much like those are fireworks. There's been a number of these pictures on Twitter the last little while. Here's a car that I guess has been set on fire, or there's something burning in the trunk. You've got police, I think, with a fire extinguisher here. It's kind of chaotic scenes with the smoke, etc. Lots of stuff going on. Here's another one. People breaking windows or kicking things. Just overall some chaotic scenes there in Montreal. And there's been a lot of people talking about it online. And it made me think about the trucker convoy of a few years ago now, and what it is about these protests in Montreal that makes them, to me, quite different than what we saw in Ottawa. Now, I haven't been in Montreal, and I know that there's often selective, I wouldn't say editing, but maybe there are some calm, reasonable people also protesting in Montreal. I don't know, I haven't been there to see this. I know with the convoy of a few years ago, the mainstream media spent a lot of time training their cameras on sort of that one swastika that was flown for about 45 seconds and use that to impugn the reputations of the vast majority of people there. So I want to make sure I'm not doing the same thing, but it seems that there's several videos of people marching, breaking things, throwing things at the police, that kind of thing. And to me, there's like a different spirit. Now, in our day and age, we don't really talk about spirit so much, not outside of religious circles anyway. But I think it is an apt description. I mean, we do use it colloquially. We'll say like this, team spirit or school spirit, or, sometimes we'll use the word vibe to denote sort of the way a certain meeting feels. You can be at a concert and it could have a good vibe, a friendly vibe. I remember years ago going to it was Metallica and Guns N' Roses in Toronto. Actually, I think it was the very next show after there was riots in Montreal, where they were turning over cars and stuff. I'm not sure if it was the exact next night, but certainly the next show. And of all the concerts I've been to, like as a young man, that one had a very intense and kind of angry vibe to it. It was unfriendly, it was uneasy. I mean, the show was decent if I recall, but it just was not a very good vibe. And I think sometimes we can talk about the spirit. And you contrast what was going on in Montreal, and sometimes it can be better to kind of look at some of this, with the sound turned off to get an idea of sort of what is going on. Kill the sound on this one. Oh, actually I got the sound in there. But you can kind of just see by people's body language, the chaotic nature here, that this doesn't seem to be, a friendly or kind spirit that seems to be behind these protests. And I was looking at some footage. Actually, if you don't know, just to talk a little bit about what this spirit means. I actually came across one of Viva Fry's live streams from the convoy years ago in Ottawa. And as it happens, like it was almost a 4-hour live stream. And I found a guy who's actually talking about the vibe or the spirit, and I think he explains it well. I'll let him, if I turn the sound back on, I'll let him explain it here.
Fantastic. How many days have you been down here for now?
So we came last Sunday, and we enjoyed the experience. It was like a vibe and energy where everybody's just on the same wavelength. Everybody's open, sharing love, sharing, like, it's almost spiritual. Like I heard you talking about, like, myself, I am not a religious person, but I am a believer. I understand that there is a higher power, and when everybody gets together like this and just we resonate off each other, we just feed each other this vibe of inclusivity, love. It doesn't matter what color, creed, religion, it's just, or sexuality, none of these ists and phobes that they've been labeling us with. It's all, I think it's projection personally, but.
What do we say on the channel?
Yeah, I think he does a good job explaining that. He says he's not a religious person, but he is spiritual. And you know what, I think even secular people, if you were, or even if it's not the Convoy, but if you're at a festivity, if you're at like a family reunion where there's good spirits, where there is fun and laughter and a spirit of community, we have names for these things, but they're kind of difficult to pin down. So what is the difference? Why are these scenes in Montreal animated so differently? Now I want to be careful here. I'm not making this about left and right. There can be, well, here's a good example, I'll just show it briefly. Some pictures from the January 6th riots of 2021. Let me get this on here. And let's look at people's body language. They're starting to pick things up. They're upset with the media. You could say understandably, that's sort of beside the point, but look at what they're doing. And just, the looks on their faces, the way they're comporting themselves. This clearly has a different spirit than, the trucker convoy, for example. Anyway, you get the idea of that. So what does that say? Like, from a political point of view, obviously it's not reasonable to have a government say, we'll allow protests that have a good spirit, but not allow ones that have a bad spirit. So we're really left with looking at people's behavior. And that was like a big problem with the way, and I don't want to relitigate the whole Freedom Convoy here again, but it seemed that what got people really upset about it, those who weren't in favor of it, was not so much the protests, I don't think, but, not the fact that people were protesting, but that they were on the other side. So for example, even though these what I would depict as pro-Palestinian protesters, I think a lot of what they have to say about the state of Israel and about Israelis and about Jews is quite reprehensible. Does everyone say those things on that side? Not necessarily. But I guess my view is you should be allowed to protest. You can march up and down, the sidewalks in Montreal. You can wave your flags, but you can't be busting windows. You can't be lighting cars on fire and that kind of thing. And I think what's happened is it's becoming obvious that there's a double standard in our society. And I think part of what we're missing is governments aren't well equipped to tell us what is morally right and good. We kind of know it intuitively, like when you look at, some of the pictures of the Freedom Convoy, and I think the sound's turned down there. But you just have a look at people's body language. You got people giving out coffee, you got kids, you got the infamous bouncy castles. There's certainly a different vibe here. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what kind of spirits do we want to, invite into our protests, into our political activity. You don't need to be religious to understand this. Jordan B. Peterson released a book recently called We Who Wrestle with God, and I got my copy and started reading it. I'm, I think, about 100 pages in. But he's interesting because he's secular, but he's looking at some of these religious ideas from a psychological point of view, which is fine. That's one way to look at it. I find, as a Christian, I come at Christianity and the scriptures and God and the Bible, that kind of thing, from a different angle. But I do find Peterson's work quite helpful, and he talks a lot about, where are we aiming? Are we aiming up to the good, to the right, to the true, to the beautiful, that kind of thing, or are we aiming down into things like bitterness and envy and vileness and contempt and those sorts of things? And it's interesting to think about these different spiritual poles, if you will, and look at a world around us and see which way people seem to be aiming. Now, I want to be very careful here too. I know that any individual can have a good aim or can have a bad aim, and this isn't about race or religion even exactly. That it's not about people's color of skin or even sort of what religious set of beliefs one ascribes, what religious beliefs one holds to be true. But I think to ignore this and just sort of say, well, any way of thinking, any aim is just as good as any other. I think when we look at some of the pictures in Montreal, I don't know that the spirits that are behind what's getting people going are good and ones that we want to encourage. Just like the ones at January 6th there, as we saw. Now, were there people at January 6th who maybe were peaceful? I don't doubt it, but the images that I showed here, clearly people were animated with a spirit of anger and hostility, maybe even hatred. So I think it's a good way to look at what's going on in our world. What are the spirits that are behind it? And do we want more of this or do we want less of this? And I think maybe as a society we're realizing that governments can't legislate this. They can't. I think that's what's happened with Trudeau in particular, but it's not just Trudeau, where we have a state set of morals where fighting climate change is good and having inclusive spaces is good. And if we do these things, it makes us morally good. If we take vaccines, if we mask, if we do these things, it makes us a virtuous person. If we don't, it makes us, an unvirtuous person. And I think we need to recognize that governments aren't good at helping us figure out our morals. That's not really their place. And I think collectively, left and right, we're starting to understand that this can't be in the hands of government. This has to be something that we take on as individuals, as couples, as families, as friends, as communities. We need to ask ourselves, by what spirit are we going to animate our actions? Are we going to aim to the good, to the true, to the beautiful, or are we going to give in to our basest desires? Tell me what you think. This whole idea of looking at the spirits behind a protest, does it make any sense? Does it have any place in a secular world like ours that we live in? Or might it give us a clue as to what is behind some of what we're seeing on social media? Leave a comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching.